I don't want to be around. You know, I don't want to have to think. I don't want to have to rebuild. I feel lifeless, and the soul has essentially been taken out of me.
Great way to start a podcast. James Thompson, welcome to The Greatest Comeback.
Mate, thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
Dude, when you reached out to me, I was so happy. I saw your DM on LinkedIn and I jumped on it because this is a story that, in terms of all the episodes I've recorded so far, I think this, and this is not to diminish anyone else's story, but this is a big one. This is a big one. So I just wanted to honour the fact that you're willing to tell it and the courage that takes. So, and thank you for trusting me with this.
Oh, mate. Trusted you for several years. So it's,
Only?
As soon as I saw it, I thought, it's a story that needs to be told, and a story that hopefully, people can relate to more than anything else. A story that is never really told.
Yeah. Mate, help us get to know James Thompson. Childhood, upbringing, family circumstances. Give us a feel for how you grew up, where you grew up.
Yeah, I grew up, in a very good environment. I had, obviously a mum and dad that are still married. A very strong connection. I was brought up in the southwest of England, and I had a very good childhood.
Whereabouts?
A place called Wiltshire, a place called Pewsey, so a small village.
Okay.
30,000 people, 3,000 people maybe. And grew up there, and my parents put me in a very good school, so I went to a private school.
What did your parents do?
My dad was in sales, still technically is. He worked at Oracle. My mum
runs in the blood.
Yeah, sales does run in the blood. So was my brother. My mum was a stay-at-home mum. Looked after me. I was a lonely child, essentially. To my mum and dad. And then I was put through a very good school, very good upbringing. One of the best schools in the country. Still get the mickey taken out of me for being at a posh school, or a public school boy as they call them in the UK. But couldn't have been happier with my upbringing and how the friends that I had, the family that I had, it became out of all things, wanted to be an actor after university. Didn't really see much of a journey there, so to speak, and then went into kind of becoming a labourer. I became a builder, which is a lot of people did in Pewsey, just to keep the money going. And it wasn't really what I wanted to do. My dad got me into Oracle from a young age as a talent, inside sales. So I had that IT sales in my blood, and then moved to Australia. This is when I was about 22, 23. I came over to Australia with $200 to my name.
Had you travelled through Australia before?
I had, I had the opportunity to travel the world for a year with my three best friends when I was 17, 18, or 18, 19. And one of our stops was Australia. And we fell in love with the place. My brother actually moved out to Australia, when I was about 22, 23, and I followed. And as soon as I sat on Manly beachfront on New Year's Eve when I arrived, I said, I'm never leaving this place.
That'll do it.
Yeah. So, stayed on my brother's sofa for the first 6 months, much to my sister-in-law's annoyance, when they had two young kids. Borrowed a lot of money off my brother, and I became a brickie labourer here just to keep the money going. And then found my own way, and by chance, out of a poker game with some friends who I'm still friends with today, I met a guy called Mikey who was in IT, and I said, is there any jobs going? And he said, yep, and can they sponsor? It was, yep, and I was there for several years, and then, I wanted to get into IT, I wanted to get into the reseller land, and then I went from there, and that's where we met.
Yeah. Yeah, wow. Thank God for Mikey.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and still a very good friend of mine to this day.
Beautiful. We had the opportunity to spend a couple of hours in the car on the way here, and you talked about Brooke in glowing terms.
Yeah.
Where did you meet Brooke?
I met Brooke on Australia Day 10 years ago. I was ironically locked out of my own house after the night before. I got a phone call from a friend saying, we're having a house party. There's going to be some girls there. I was single at the time, and it was a Sunday that year. And I was against it. I got persuaded to buy some beers and head over.
You were against it, going to a house party?
I was going to a house party. I was like, I've got to go to work Monday. I actually had to fly to Brisbane. So I was like, I just don't want to be hungover. It's going to be a 5 a.m. start. And my friend Jimmy was like, no, you got to come. And eventually I got a rubber arm, so pretty easy. And yeah, she walked in the door and was like, and that was it. We hit it off, and 10 years later, we've got kids and a mortgage and a happy life.
The works, yeah. Yeah, wow. So you got 3 children. Maggie came along first.
Yeah, Maggie, she's now 7.
Okay.
Yeah, so
And you've got Isla,
who's 5.
who's 5.
Yeah.
That life with Brooke, with Maggie and Isla, before Hunter came along, give me a flavour for what life looked like for you guys. You've got 2 kids, you're happily married, your career's flourishing.
Yeah, I mean, it was... Before Hunter, it was just Maggie, right? So, yeah. So Maggie was 18 months old. We lived in Cromer. We had a great house, obviously renting. I had a great job at Solicitor. And we just had a baby boy, Hunter. And I thought my life was complete. I had a boy and a girl. I had a great job, had a great girl. I lived in a great place, had great friends, had my brother around the corner. And I just remember sitting down with my parents, had come over for dinner, and we were watching Pink Floyd Pulse. Me and my dad's favourite things to do was to watch that. And I even put it on social media. I said, I'm the happiest I've ever been. I've got 2 young children, a gorgeous girl in Maggie, and, Hunter had come along. And I thought I'd completed life. It was,
You were flying.
I was flying, maybe, naively or in some ways arrogantly. I thought, okay, I'm set up now. And it was great. It was smelling of roses. It was, Maggie was at that amazing 18-month stage where, she's just funny, she's hilarious. And then I got my boy. I obviously always being the stereotypical man having a boy. But it was amazing to have that too. I was even talking to the doctors about getting the snip. I was, that was it. One of each. And life was good. I was successful at Solicitor. I was, as I said, in a great place. Yeah.
But things don't always work out the way you expect them to, right?
No.
Yeah.
And it can come out of nowhere.
Life throws you a curveball.
Yeah.
Hunter's birth, was that straightforward? Any complications with that?
Not essentially. I mean, Brooke's always had Caesars, right? So there's always those additional complications with a C-section. He came a little bit early, 3-4 weeks premature. So he had to have that extra care, the pipe up the nose, that kind of thing, just to make sure get the mucus out of the lungs, but nothing that was catastrophic. It was every birth's different and every story's different, but he came to us like a whirlwind. It was he'd made his mark, and he was there, and it was in and around that time when Game of Thrones was down to the last couple of episodes. I remember it very well. But yeah, he was healthy. He was fine.
And so you guys, I imagine you guys are in the routine of caring for a toddler and a brand new baby that you've recently brought home.
2 under 2, it was, wow, we've got another one. And at that stage, obviously, Maggie was very much a what about me, you know, but I guess having that boy and the girl, there was, different areas of love that each one needs, or Maggie was very close to, and still is very close to Mom, but it was, we were going through that, hit you like a 10-ton truck, you've got another baby, so you've got essentially no hands to deal with things. You're dealing with an 18-month going to daycare, but then also the sleepless nights, the nappy changes, the feeding, the sleep deprivation, that kind of thing, which gets any parent in any state of mind.
So you're in this routine of, I guess the household looks like a busy household with little kids, and you and Brooke are sharing the responsibility of that. And I'm assuming that you're helping with whatever you can. But one morning things change for you, and Brooke, and your family, and your friends, and all the people you know.
Yeah.
Are you okay to talk about the day when your life changed?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it was, as I said, I think it was the penultimate Game of Thrones. We just had family over, Maggie was asleep in her room. We'd gone to bed relatively early to get ready for the sleepless night, essentially. He was 3 weeks old. It was about 3-4 o'clock in the morning. I'd woken up to do my, standard toilet visit at that time, and I looked down at the cot to see him blue and blood coming out of his nose, and instantly knew that something was wrong. And after turning on the lights and getting Brooke to get up, realised that he wasn't breathing, and we didn't know how long he hadn't been breathing for, but he was lifeless. So I'd instantly, when you go through the first aid with the babies, when you first have your first child, you do the 3-4 day course, and you learn how to resuscitate a baby, and you kind of sat there going, am I really going to need to know this stuff? I did, I went into fight mode.
You tried to resuscitate?
I tried to resuscitate him. I had Brooke on the phone to the police. I was doing the way, with the thumbs. I thought I'd resuscitated him at one point because I heard the exhale, but it was only the fact that I'd actually removed all the air from the lungs. There was a little bit of air left, The police were, the emergency services were telling me, just keep going, just keep going, just keep going. And the police, for me, it felt like they were there within 30 seconds. All we heard was, all we heard was the lights and the sirens, the screaming into our driveway, the banging on the door. I'm still there, resuscitating. Brooks opened the door and let them in. And at this point, it was, right, James, we need you to leave. And the ambulance was there as well. So we've essentially walked out of the door, leaving our child with the police and the paramedics, not knowing what was coming next, whether they were coming out with good news or with bad. But the longer the minutes took, the longer we knew it wasn't going to be a positive response. And, as you can imagine, Brooke and I are pacing up and down, the feel of, am I dreaming?
Is this really happening?
Yeah. Why is this happening? That, am I in a dream? Am I hallucinating? Why is this happening to me? I remember walking past the wall and flinching to punch it, and I said, no, just, I don't know. You felt helpless. You just didn't know. You felt soulless. And then more and more police came. And then the priest came in, the emergency service, priest. And after about half an hour of them in the room, they came out and said, "We're sorry, he's gone." At this point, I've never wallowed or that you see that cry on the movies and the sheer despair. That's what came out, and came out of Brooke.
Yep.
He'd gone, 3 weeks old, and I can remember it as clear as day. To this day, it was a experience that I will never want anyone to go through, and I certainly don't want to experience it again. And at this point, we had friends and family there. I think we had about 40 people in there at one point. And at this point, the dogs were going mad, and our neighbours obviously knew something was going on. They took the dogs off us and put them next door, and then we heard Maggie crying in the other room, and she'd obviously been woken up by the sirens, the dogs, and it was like, fuck, we've got another kid, fuck. And I ran in there, and Maggie's just there at the cot, just knowing something's wrong, and the poor thing, you're comforting her. It's 3-4 in the morning. She should be asleep, and yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say an 18-month-old would remember, but she doesn't like loud noises. She doesn't like dogs barking. She's scared of dogs that bark. She, I think, does remember it to this day, even at 7 years old. And yeah, I guess the next few hours were a bit of a blur. I remember.
Who was the first person you called? Do you remember?
My brother. Yeah. I always call my brother for anything that's wrong. He's 10 years older than me. He's been my confidant. He's helped me through a lot of stuff, and I called him and he didn't pick up. He was 4 in the morning. I called him again, and that's when he knew something was wrong. And I remember the conversation. He just said, "What's gone wrong?" I said, Hunter's gone." And phone was hung up, and he was around the house. And everyone that came through that door was in tears, as you can imagine. And I'm seeing my wife to be's parents in tears, partners in tears. I even at one point saw these 2 young policemen come in, or a policewoman and policeman, like they were, apprentices. What would you call them? Trainees or something. And I said, "You need to leave, as in you do not need this mentally. You do not need this. I suggest you turn around. You don't want to be here." And yeah, I remember the police taking me away, first of all to check whether Brooke was okay. In a way, they asked me, is this something that Brooke's done? And I was like, no, get that out of your head. This was an act. This was Sid's, essentially. And I remember the police, a guy called Charlie Thompson, actually, he took me outside, and that's when I wallowed in pain. And he put his arm around me and said, "You did everything you can, and you did more than 90% of what people would do." And it never really, again, you still feel, is this a dream? Am I, this can't be real. But then when it was a case of, they said, "Do you want to go and see him?" And we actually refused. And I said, "I can't. I've got the vision in my head. I can't get it out. I don't want to see him there." And they said, "Well, I think you should." I said, "Well, it's my decision. I'm not going in there." And that's when the small black bag was removed from the room, and yeah, it was the worst day of my life.
The worst dream of your life, yeah. It wasn't a dream, though.
No. And I just remember after that, Brooke and I just cuddled up on the sofa, and she said, "What do we do tomorrow?" And so I honestly don't know, but we've got to take it minute by minute, hour by hour. And then we fell asleep. It was like, you get I get adrenaline sleep. We were so pumped up on adrenaline that we both essentially passed out. I don't know how long we slept for, but by this point, most of the emergency services and police had arrived. We had detectives in at this point, and then we had all our family. Mum, dad, my mum and dad, Brooke's mum and dad, partners. My brother, Brooke's uncles. We had everyone there that we could. But I was numb. Brooke was numb. There was conversations going on, but you were just narrow-minded. That was, 3 weeks after he was born, and my life changed in a second.
Do you remember much about the days and weeks that followed?
Yeah, we didn't want to go back to the house, so we've got a larger network of friends that helped us do that. So we made a decision with the family that we wouldn't stay there. Our neighbours had kindly offered to look after the dogs indefinitely, and it was, my brother, said, "Look, why don't you come and stay with us? He's got enough space, and he's got a granny flat. Let's go there." And so we did. And I remember packing a bag and getting in our car and driving to, Chris's house, which was, 10, 15 minutes down the road, and just holding hands with Brooke in silence. Didn't want the radio on, didn't want anything. Just didn't know what to say to each other, didn't know how to think. And then those days, we had stayed at my brother's, and we didn't want to see anyone for some time, as you can imagine. We had friends that I had called and said, "Look, this is what's happened. So if you want to explain this to other people." My dad called Noel at Solicitor to say, "This is what's happened," and my brother took some time off. So we just spent days and weeks with the family. People came over and dropped food off. I got given a load of Valium by a friend just to take the edge off, which had its effects in the end the wrong way. But we just slept a lot. We ate, we slept, we ate, we slept. We had nightmares. We woke up hysterically in tears. We'd sit there and try and talk about it. Didn't know who to turn to. Brooke had to go to the doctors to take there's the pills that remove the milk from your breasts to make sure that she wasn't leaking. But so the first few weeks were a blur. But as I said, we had such a good group of friends that showed how much they cared. And my brother came up with a great idea of, well, I think it was more that he just wanted a bit of general labour from me, but we built a tree house, in his front garden. And so it was just a way of, a very good idea from Chris to keep our mind off things, not get sucked into your own brain, your own thoughts, your own mental state. Was, let's go and do something. So, we went to Bunnings, we got a load of wood, we built this gorgeous tree house that maybe took 2 or 3 days, and we called it Hunter's Lodge. And and then it was obviously in around that May time, so the weather was good, so the sun was out, and that kept my mind off things. But thinking back about it now, it's such a mesh of different memories that I can't really put a timeline to.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
still,
no, I get it. I get it. Grief is such a big thing to talk about. And it's not until you experience real grief that you figure out that it's not linear. There's no start point and end point. It comes and goes, and it's different for different people. What was it like for you to experience the grief that was being expressed by the people that loved you and cared about you?
It could be seen in two ways. I was thankful that they were upset, and they were grieving, but I was also knowing that they don't know what I'm going through. They've lost a grandson or a nephew, but deep down there was an anger. It was, you don't know what I'm going through.
Yeah.
And selfishly it was focus on me.
Yeah.
Which, looking back, is actually a very bad way of looking at it. But when you're in that kind of frame of mind and that cloud is hanging over you, you're not thinking straight.
Yeah.
It's as you said, there is no grief. Doesn't have an agenda. It comes to you at the most random time. Walking down the street, getting a coffee, listening to a song, or just in your dreams. It comes at you and it hits you like a 10-ton truck. And I was thinking, well, what about me? Which is weird saying it, but it was very. I think grief is very selfish in that instance, that you do feel that you're on your own. And looking back at it, that there was a lot of anger, but not anger at them, but it's just that, I was angry because I didn't want this to happen to me. Why had this happened to me?
Yeah.
But then it's personally my issue, and so it's that's how I felt.
Yeah. I guess the reason I asked that is because it's such a difficult thing for people to deal with.
Yeah.
And often, certainly, the moments in my life that have had heavy grief associated to them, oftentimes people just don't know what to say. They want to help.
Yeah.
And they make attempts at helping, and they make attempts at saying the right thing. But in that moment, it's almost like there's nothing that you can say that's going to make me feel better.
Everything's hollow.
Yeah.
It's... Yeah, I was in my own world all the time, and, I had friends come over with food and presents for the girls or whatever, and, they would come up walking up crying, and I'm so sorry this happened, and you just felt numb. It was you have no idea what I'm going through right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of want to focus a little bit now in terms of the conversation around that journey of grief, and we talked about that not being linear. And in preparation for the podcast and knowing that this was going to be such an important conversation, an important story, not just for you to tell, but for people to hear, particularly people that are going through something similar or have gone through something similar. I did a little bit of research in terms of the types of things that are said to people, when they've had that moment. And I want to read you a couple of things that are most often said with the best intentions, but in that moment of grief, they have no currency. And there's just a few things here. Here's an example. And let me know whether this resonates for you.
Yeah.
They're in a better place now. At least you have other children.
Yeah.
Everything happens for a reason. You need to be strong. At least they didn't suffer.
Yeah.
You can always have another child.
Yeah. And the other one is time is a healer.
Yeah.
You don't want to hear that at that point.
Yeah.
You know what the best two things that were said to me were the opposite, and two good friends of mine said them, was it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. And the other one was your life is never going to be the same again.
Yeah.
And I saw so much more in those than just have another baby. It'll be fine.
Yeah.
You know, you'll be fine in time. You know, at that point, you don't think about time. You know, yeah. But yeah, I think those ones that you said, I would imagine have been said to me several times.
Yeah.
Needless to say, I'm not saying that someone's trying to give me advice or trying to help me that it's bad, but it's almost hollow.
Yeah. And I say that not to pass judgment on anyone that might have attempted to say those things to you, because that was coming from a place of vulnerability and, trying to lift some of that burden off you.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that there's just nothing that can be said.
No, there isn't. And, people would just call me up. Once we kind of gave the green light for people to call us or see us, people would just say, I don't know what to say.
Yeah.
And I would say, you don't need to say anything. Your presence is good enough. Or let's talk about football.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the next Gang of You's album. Let's talk about our next holiday. Get my mind off it. Give me a hug. Like, you don't have to say anything. Just being here is more important. And that it is the best intentions. But yeah, you can't comfort someone when they're in that frame of mind, and, unless you've been through it, right? And the first, Haley was a good friend of mine who said it's going to get worse before it gets better. Was the one that had lost twins, stillborn twins, and she was one of the first people I called, and she was actually the person that I called to let everyone else know. She's actually godmother to Maggie, and that still resonates to me to this day, and it's hard saying it to people, but it has validity to it.
Yeah.
And I thank her for it.
She said it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Yeah.
What did worse look like for you? What did that grief journey look like for you in the following weeks and months?
Yeah. I think it goes back to that kind of what Brooke said to me. What do we do tomorrow? I had to deal with the funeral. My brother took the wake on legendarily, but I had to deal with the funeral. I had to deal with the ashes, the coffin, where we were going to have have the funeral. That in itself was mind-crunchingly depressing to do. When you're looking at yourself and you're thinking, I've lived every parent's worst nightmare by losing. I've outlived my child. Needless to say, no one to this day still knows how SIDS happens, which is crazy with the amount of medical, knowledge we have in the world. But SIDS is still an unknown, syndrome. So the waves of hatred, the waves of why me, the waves of everyone else has a better life. Then the waves of I've got to make sure my daughter Maggie's okay. Is my wife okay? I've got to deal with the funeral. I've got the funeral director calling me. I've got to write a speech. I've got to think about a playlist of music. Yeah, it was a roller coaster. And thinking about it to this day, like I'm actually, my brother actually said to me a few months after that, he said, look, I think if you were 22, 23 at the time, I don't think you'd be here. It would have been that tough. But I had the support network, and, our friends were incredible. They raised, I think, just over $7,000 on essentially a GoFundMe page to give to us to take us on holiday, to get away from everything. So the dogs were looked after. We booked 2 weeks in Fiji with Maggie, obviously, which was something to look forward to, some, purpose. Get away, get into the sun, go and have some cocktails, that kind of thing. Let Maggie run riot on the beach. But then you get there, and the first thing you hear is a mother shouting, "Hunter, Hunter, Hunter," because he's running off in the pool, and it instantly hits you again, Yeah. I just remember sobbing. I didn't do it. I didn't grieve the best way. I turned to alcohol quite regularly. I couldn't sleep without it. It became something that I needed. I self-prescribing Valium to myself and self-medicating Valium, then becoming reliant on that just to walk out the door. And I guess, one of the things that I want to kind of talk about and for other people who do listen to this is there are ways of doing it better than me.
Yeah.
I've learned not how not to do it.
Yeah.
And back to friends, obviously the Fiji trip, which was good and bad, obviously, as you can imagine. But, the lads that I know, they got us in a boxing class. They did boxing twice a week. That is one hell of a way to overcome grief. Bit of fitness, but you're punching a punch bag. You're learning, rhythm, and you're getting fit at the same time. And we was 8 of us, and it took my mind off things a lot. We then looked at doing city to surf, so I was getting fit running. At the first few months, obviously, it's a whirlwind, you don't know going, and I got into the right direction of where I needed to go. Yeah.
Was there a point in those first few months when you thought, I'm not going to come back from this?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I felt, what's the point of living, and the rumination that we had, that you can imagine to this day, the memories I have of that moment, and thinking about coming onto this podcast, it's brought back a lot of those triggering moments. But 6 years on, I can manage it, and I've managed it in a way that I feel I'm pretty proud of now. But you lost confidence in life. I think that's the best way to portray it. Is why me? What have I done to deserve this? I don't want to be around. I don't want to have to think. I don't want to have to rebuild. I feel lifeless, and the soul has essentially been taken out of me. And I think that it's very similar to how Brooke would have felt as well. It was the why me, the soulless perception of, do I really want to be around anymore?
Yeah. And was that a thought that came and went, or did that ever metastasize into something that was more malicious in terms of your intention for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I later on down the journey, I guess at the start, I'd gone into protect mode. It was, I need to make sure that Brooke is okay, and I need to make sure that Maggie's okay, you know. And it would come in waves, and but it was kind of like, you know, you kind of kick yourself back into gear and go, no, I've got a family, I've got a life, I've got a job that I'm not currently doing, and I need to get back into that, and I've got bills to pay, but later on down the path, when we'd had Isla, and I think it's just came out of, it was during COVID we had Isla, you know, that's when depression really kicked in. And yeah, I was happy that we'd had another child, but there was a tiny bit inside me that thought, it's not a boy. But then I looked at the positives of it to say, I'm glad it's not a boy, because the memories of Hunter would not be, you know, it's like that boy would have replace, you know, but we obviously, COVID, stressful time for everyone in lockdown. I wasn't enjoying my job. I went into a spiral, and I had an altercation with a friend that really opened my eyes more than anything else. And I didn't like myself. And again, I was drinking heavily. I was not in a good place. And at that point, I was denying the fact that I was depressed. I was denying the fact that everything was not okay. And it had effect on my family. It had effect on my wife. And there was this moment, where Brooke had left with the girls. I was doing my usual, you know, if I'm depressed, I sleep. I was trying to sleep. My head was going a million miles an hour. And yeah, at that point, I thought, it's time. I don't want to be here. You know, I'd written a letter. I'd written all my passwords on the phone, or my passcodes, and on a piece of paper. I'd written a very small note. I'd left my phone there, and I was about to get on a bus and drive to North Head. And I wasn't obviously thinking straight. I had a horrible dark cloud above my head that was making decisions for me. And then I had a quick moment of going, what the fuck are you doing? And I called Lifeline. And I had a 4-hour conversation with a lady that has no name, but I called her Judy. And she turned me right round, and she made me realize how important life is, you know, how lucky I am, you know, to be alive, to be healthy, to be living in the beautiful country that is Australia, to have 2 beautiful, healthy children, to have children. You know, there's a lot of people I know out there that can't have children, or have struggled. And yeah, it's mind blowing how she turned me around, and she said, look, James, you have manic depression. You need to get yourself sorted. And she helped me with writing a letter to Brooke and writing a schedule, and got myself back on track. I went to the doctors. I went and saw, you know, I had therapy. I went and sought help. And if it wasn't thanks to Judy, you know, it could have been a different story. But if I look back at that now, I hate myself for even thinking that. You know, to think that my children wouldn't have a father figure. and what I put my wife through, what already she's been through on top of Hunter. But it was no fault of mine. It was how I felt and how depression can get you and grief can get you. You don't think straight. And if I could give any advice to people that are going through those avenues, is take a step back and realize what you've got and who you are and reset, you know, and that's what we do with Hunter's birthday every year. You know, it's been 6 years. Every year we celebrate his birthday. We get a birthday cake. We sing happy birthday. We play his album, which is Gang of Youths, Go Farther Into Lightness. We play it on vinyl. We play it on repeat.
Classic.
And his funeral song was Persevere, and I've got Persevere's lyrics on my back, tattooed on my back. There was a time where we couldn't listen to that song for years, but now we do. But we have, what we do on that day is we buy balloons and we let them off into the air. I know it's not very eco-friendly, but to be honest, I don't give a shit. It's for our own sake. And it makes us reset every year how lucky you are to be alive. And going back to those comments, he's saying, you know, you'll have another child and everything else, and life goes on and time will heal. It does. But you don't want to hear it at that time. You know, it's... but yeah, it's... I know we've gone a bit of a tangent.
No. Yeah. It's funny. I would imagine that, again, with the utmost respect and compassion for the people that are trying to help you with your grief, the reality is that you might be able to have another child, but you wanted that one.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and, you know, like what we were talking about earlier in the car is that I'm lucky in a way, and you can see that I've always tried to look at the positives. Not in the first few months, don't get me wrong, but what I wrote in the wake speech, you know, and the funeral speech. You know, at the funeral, I actually wrote, what do you call it, an epilogue? About him being 18 and being his 18th birthday. And I depicted a personality of him. He was a pain in the ass to his sisters. He was a great footballer, you know. But I think one positive, and I know that Brooke will feel the same way in this, is the fact that he was only 3 weeks old meant that we didn't see a personality. We didn't see him laugh for the first time. We didn't see him smile, you know. And that's something that we're fortunate to have. When there's people that have, lost children at 7 years old, at 10 years old, at 18 years old, you know, they have a bond. But I wanted him. And that's why I've got his tattoo of his handprint. You know, I wanted that, you know, father-boy figure. I wanted to play football with him. I wanted to, you know, I wanted that ladship, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I wanted it as part of my perfect family at the time.
Yeah.
Beautiful wife, great job, boy and a girl. You know, it's the 2.4 children kind of feel. That's the Hollywood-esque look, you know, but then Isla came along. She's a absolute gem, you know. She's just a ball of fun and fury, you know. And I guess one thing that we did, which may not be a lot of the parts that people wouldn't go down, was we went and saw a psychic. We went and saw a medium, you know, and she was incredible. You know, we see her every year now. She's got a waiting list of 2 years. You know, like we've put her in front of her friends, in front of her. The stuff that she brings up, you know, is stuff that no one would know, even if she had access to all my social accounts. she still wouldn't know. You know, in the first session that we had was, she's like, he's here. And he wants to say, it's not your fault. You know, and the things that she brought up, like, you know, oh, you like to DJ, but you don't think you're very good. Well, he thinks you are, you know, and you can't write that stuff. And that gave us hope as well, that spiritually he's not gone, you know, and that's why we let the balloons off in the air every year. And that's how we told the girls that Hunter's not around here, but he's up there looking down and he's there protecting you. And that's why we let them off, you know. But.
How did your relationship with Brooke shift as a result of losing Hunter?
It made us have such a deep connection. You know, grief obviously brings people together. But
Can often force people apart.
Well, exactly. And we were fortunate enough to talk it through. And there's days where I would be on cloud nine. Well, I'd be happy. I would never be on cloud nine, but I'd be happy. Pardon me. And Brooke would be down, and vice versa. And it was a way of just talking it through. We got stronger. It built such a deep relationship. But then, you know, a few years down the road, when I finally realised that I was depressed, I almost pushed her away. You know, she'd had enough of me. And, you know, she even said to me that she was thinking, you know, can I live my life without a father, without a husband? Am I going to be a single mom? You know, and she told me that. And that in itself gave me a massive kick up the arse to think, what am I doing here? You know, I'm being selfish. I'm so spiraled in my own thoughts and my own issues that I'm not thinking about the woman that has gone through exactly the same pain. And yeah, and we obviously worked it through. We're still happily married, but you know, yeah, we had to answer your question in short form. It was a roller coaster, you know, and we got very strong at the start, and then we would have very loose parts, and you know, we don't normally argue as a couple. We tend to talk it through, but there was a period where we did argue, you know. So, but yeah, it was. I looking back at it now, like 6 years on, we're the strongest we've ever been.
The American writer Anne Rioff wrote, "Grief comes in two parts. The first is loss, and the second is the remaking of life." I want to talk about the remaking of life now with you. I'm sure the process of coming back is still unfolding in many ways. But was there a moment that you can recall, however small that might have been, when you felt something shift, like there was a crack of light?
During
that initial, those first few months after losing Hunter, or in fact, let's not limit it to months. I mean, let's limit it to, you know, it's open slather in terms of how long that took. But was there a moment when you felt some joy again?
Yeah.
And things, and you saw that as perhaps a starting point.
Okay.
A starting point.
Yeah. There were few and far between, obviously, at the start. But yeah, it makes, sorry, I was just trying to rethink there, but, you know, you go through such a dark patch that it's like, I was thinking about this the other day, when you get your first crush, your first girlfriend, and you break up, and that horrible feeling of the breakup, and how am I going to live my life, and my life is over, and then 2 months later, you're at a party and, you know, you have a few drinks and you're happy again. But I think for me, it was getting married. We were meant to get married when Brooke was pregnant with Hunter, and obviously, we were getting married after Hunter was born, and then we obviously lost him, and we pushed the wedding out by a year, so we just can't do it, obviously. And everyone's like, yeah, of course you can't. There's no way that you could, you know, physically go through that at the moment. But I remember a year on, Brooke was pregnant again, and we had our wedding. We had our wedding in the Hunter, and Maggie walking down the aisle with her little Converse shoes, as a flower girl. There's a picture of me on my knee, like down, trying to get ready to hug her, and I just said, "I'm back." And then we announced that Brooke was pregnant again, as a surprise to everyone there.
Oh, wow. It must have been a fun day.
Yeah, it was. And, you know, everyone that was at that wedding had been through what we'd been through and helped us. And it was, even my brother actually said, he said that we handled the Hunter piece very well. We mentioned him, but we didn't make it about him. We wanted to make it about us. And, you know, we gave a toast to him, and he said, you know, thank you for what you've taught us in such a short space of time, and how you've brought everyone together. And those people were in that room. So to being able to announce that we were pregnant again, and Brooke was only 8 weeks or 10 weeks, but we just didn't care. And it was, and that sense of life was back. You know, it was, you know, not essentially we move on, but we move forward. And that's, yeah, that, I think that, you know, looking back, I know you put me on the spot there, but yeah, that was the moment where I thought, you know what, life does go on.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think it's possible, I mean, to some degree, you've answered the question, but, and I think I think about this question in relation to the nature of the podcast, which is coming back from life crises. But the loss of a child is something that, even when I was thinking about the premise for the podcast, I thought, is it even possible? Is the concept of it making a comeback after losing a child, is that even possible? Or is it more a case of learning to carry it?
Yeah. I think it's an ongoing journey for the comeback, right? You know, I don't think there's an end. You know, no one will ever be the same from losing a child, whether it's SIDS, stillborn, miscarriage. You know, it's all there, but it's how you bounce back. And there's the right way and the wrong way. I can safely say I did it the wrong way, but I started to get the right way. And yeah, and, you know, obviously the greatest comeback being the title of this. It's ongoing.
Yeah.
You know, I'm never, as Woody said to me, you know, well, life's never going to be the same again. You know, it's not. But it's made me goddamn stronger, and it's made me resilient, and it's made me realise how to overcome other things that life chucks at you.
Yeah.
And has it grown me a bit more thicker skin, maybe? And that's what I thank Hunter for. You know, and that's what I said in the wake was, thank you for giving me a resilient platform moving forward. I'm not saying I wanted, you know, that to happen, and if I could, you know, turn back time, I would. But I wanted to look at the positive of it, and that is reset, reassess, and realize how lucky you are, and you will be happy again. And that, to me, I see as a success, which I then ultimately see as a comeback.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, you do have a boy. in your
Yeah.
life. You want to talk about Max?
Yeah. You know, we moved to Port Macquarie 3 years ago for a bit of a sea change. I mean, generally down to the cost of living in Sydney, but I don't think we certainly would have had another child, and if we were still in Sydney. Brooke, gave me the wink. Let's go. And we did actually have a miscarriage first time round, which was again traumatic. Brought back a lot of triggering feelings. You can imagine that. But for me, and I'm sure, and going back to the whole saying, what you shouldn't say. I was again trying to look at the positive of, it's your body trying to work again. It's your body, treat it as your body's getting used to having an egg and fertilizing. It's just natural. Brooke really didn't want to hear that at the time. She was distraught. But we went again, and we fell pregnant pretty much straight away. And this time we didn't want to know the gender. This is our last baby. The girls, Maggie and I, they're now 7 and 5. We told them it was going to be a surprise. And 10 weeks ago, it was a beautiful moment where, a C-section, the doctors was like, we're not going to tell you what it is, you're going to tell us.
Yeah.
It was 3-4 in the morning, obviously living in Port. There's not many people working at that time from a surgery perspective. So they were all a couple of coffees down, and, they raised up a boy. And those 9 months killed me, not knowing what it was. If it was another girl, obviously I would have been happy, but I cried my eyes out. I had tears of joy. I just wept that, it was a boy. So did Brooke. And his name's Max Hunter Thompson, 10 weeks old this week.
Beautiful.
Yeah. It's like the universe has done a full circle. And he looked like Hunter when he was born. He doesn't look like Hunter now. He looks like Maggie. But it's made our family complete. We will never forget Hunter. I think about him still every day. I've got his hand tattooed on my arm, but he is what has made us get there, and why we're the happiest that we've been. Everything happens for a reason.
Yeah.
Something that you don't want to hear, but to be living in Port, to have a different lifestyle, and to now have 3 children, and is, for me, the greatest comeback.
It's beautiful. Mate, what would you say to someone that's going through this, that's still early in the process? What advice would you give them?
And I guess that's one of the reasons why I wanted to come on, is that, I've got a couple that I know that live now in the UK that have been through very similar traumatic situation with stillborn. Is don't rush things, be together, talk. If you can, find a routine, of getting fit and healthy, going for runs, going boxing classes. I play, much to my wife's annoyance, a lot of golf, and my manager's annoyance. But get into, and I know it's hard in the first few months, but what I found was the biggest medicine at that time was being with family, being around people you love. Stay off social media. That is the biggest depression without depression. And know that in time you'll look back and it will your life will never be the same again, but it will make you stronger. but you've got to take it day by day. And as long as you've got the right people around you, your partner, you're talking, and let it out as well. Cry. If you know it's coming, just go. Just let it go. If you're in a park, if you're in the car, let it out. Like a lot of the time I kept it in, you know. At the funeral I kept it in. At the wake I kept it in. I didn't want to show. I wanted to show strength for Brooke, and I think that's where a lot of it bottled up for the depression.
Yeah.
Right? I was literally a bottle ready to pop. Just be in tune with those emotions, because it is going to get a lot worse before it gets better. But understand that's grief.
Yeah.
And it has, as I said earlier, it has its own agenda. It has its own... It's not structured, you know, and you've got to embrace it. And I'm not trying to sound corny, but that's how I would do it. If I was to go back to that moment, you know, I went down the wrong path. Don't look at drinking yourself to sleep, you know, and just, minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day.
Yeah.
And if I can help one person or two people that are feeling the same or going through what I went through right now, then I feel like I've helped and I've won.
Yeah.
And as we said on the first initial call, this is the reason why I wanted to come on here, but also to come on here for my own therapy, you know.
Yeah.
And talk it through
Yeah.
with a legend like yourself.
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, we were just talking in the garage before pressing record, and I think, and I say this in the pilot episode of the podcast, is there's healing as much for the listener as much for the teller as the listener. So we're in the final straight, looking to wrap. But is there anything that we haven't talked about that you feel as though is important to express that you'd like to say?
No, I think I've got through it.
Okay.
Yeah. Unless there's anything else you want to raise.
No.
Yeah.
Well, mate, I'm in awe of you and your willingness to come on and talk about this. You know, particularly men. You know, men tend to go in, you know, and I think a lot of mental health issues as they relate to men are really a consequence of not feeling as though they can express what they're feeling, and they deal with this internally, and often that manifests in unhealthy ways.
Exactly, and you know, men's mental health is getting more and more aware and widely spread. And you know, I've always been an honest and open person and wear my heart on my sleeve, and I was happy to discuss everything today. But you know, men just need to talk. And if you're not okay, talk to someone, tell someone. You know, we're humans as well, you know, and it's hard for the stigma of I'm the man of the house, I'm too proud, I don't do crying, I don't do talking about my feelings. Get over it. It's 2025. You know, talk to someone. You know, and whether it's your mom, your dad, your friend, your partner. You know, if you're not feeling well, then you know, go and see someone as well, or even reach out to me. You know, I'm more than happy to talk to anyone that feels that they've been in the same situations as me. You know, we've only got one shot at this life, and you know, the more, and as you've said, you know, it's good for you digesting this stuff. You know, it changes you as a person, and you know.
It's so true. I said to you in the garage, the dirty secret about this podcast is it's my therapy more than anyone else's. You know, it really is. It really is.
And I think that's the aim for me is that, you know, if you've got an issue or you've got something, or just talk about it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks, mate.
James,
Been
thank
really
you
good.
so much, man. You've been so courageous, and I just admire your courage and your willingness to come on here and talk about this, because I know it's not easy.
Oh,
And I
thanks,
can
brother.
see it's not
been
easy.
Yeah, it's that was exhausting.
Yeah,
But,
yeah. It's you know, grief doesn't have a roadmap.
No.
There are no tidy answers.
And I can guarantee that I still grieve. You know, I grieve in smaller levels than the first few months of what I was not aware of. But now, yeah, you know, it's still there,
Yeah.
but it's manageable. And it's about trying to manage it moving forward. And now, as I said to you in the car, you know, my favourite moment of the day is picking up my kids from school at 3 p.m.
Yeah.
You know, and now Max is smiling and giggling. It just makes me warm inside, you know.
Yeah.
And but yeah,
That's beautiful. Matt, I think this conversation, more than anything, is a reminder to anyone that we don't have to carry the weight of grief alone, and that even in the darkest places, there's still some light. So thank you for doing this. And to anyone listening who is dealing with loss in whatever shape that might be, this conversation's for you.
yeah.
You're not alone. And there is no right way to come back. There is just your way. So thank you for telling us about your way.
Thanks, brother.
Thanks, James. All the best.